The world will break you, not loudly, not all at once, slowly, through expectations you didn't agree to, through loyalty that was never returned, through patience that turned into invisibility. Machiavelli understood this truth before most men ever feel it. The world does not reward innocence, it consumes it. Most men are raised to believe that being good is enough. Work hard, be honest, be patient, be kind. And then they are shocked when the world takes advantage of them anyway, not because the world is evil, because the world is indifferent. Here is the first ruthless truth most men resist. The world does not care about your intentions. It responds only to strength, boundaries, and consequence. If you lack these, you will be used. Repeatedly. Machiavelli was not teaching cruelty. He was teaching survival. He understood that men who refuse to harden internally are punished externally, not by villains, by systems, by people. By reality itself, most men misunderstand ruthlessness. They think it means aggression, coldness, dominance over others. That is weakness disguised as force. True ruthlessness is internal. It is the ability to choose yourself without apology. Jung would say this is the moment a man meets his shadow. The part of him that can say no, the part that can walk away, the part that can disappoint others without collapsing. Most men suppress this part, and what is suppressed does not disappear. It turns inward. This is why so many men feel bitter, tired, and resentful. They were never taught how to protect themselves psychologically. They were taught how to endure. Endurance without boundaries is self-destruction. Machiavelli understood something brutal. If you are not willing to be ruthless with your own weakness, the world will be ruthless with you. That ruthlessness is not violence. It is clarity. Clarity about who gets access to you. Clarity about what you tolerate. Clarity about when you leave. Most men delay these decisions. They wait until they are exhausted, until they are angry, until damage is done. That delay is what breaks them. Winnicott would call this failure of emotional containment. The man cannot hold discomfort, so he sacrifices himself to avoid conflict. He chooses short-term peace and pays with long-term erosion. The world respects men who are hard to exploit. Not loud, not aggressive, firm. Men whose boundaries do not need explanation. Men who act early instead of resenting late. This is where ruthlessness begins. Not with others, with yourself. With the refusal to abandon your own standards for approval, comfort, or fear of loss. If this sounds uncomfortable, it should. Because comfort is what made you vulnerable. And vulnerability without protection is what the world feeds on. Machiavelli would say it without mercy. The man who refuses to harden internally will be softened externally until nothing remains. This is the starting point, not motivation, not inspiration, preparation, because the world will test you. Again and again. And only the man who has learned to be ruthless with his boundaries walks away intact. Most men don't fail because they are bad. They fail because they are harmless. They are kind without boundaries, patient without leverage, loyal without consequence. And the world exploits harmless men quietly. Here is the second ruthless truth Machiavelli understood. Kindness without the capacity for ruthlessness is not virtue. It is exposure. When you cannot say no, your yes has no value. When you cannot walk away, your loyalty is meaningless. The world does not test men by asking for everything at once. It tests them in increments, a little extra responsibility, a small violation of boundaries, a request that feels uncomfortable but manageable. Men who are afraid to be seen as difficult comply, and compliance becomes a pattern. Adler would recognize this immediately. Men who lack inner power compensate by being agreeable. They seek safety through approval. But approval is never protection. It is permission for others to take more. Machiavelli understood this as positional weakness. If others know you will absorb discomfort to keep peace, they will keep handing you discomfort. Not maliciously, naturally. This is where Jung's shadow becomes critical. Every man has the capacity for aggression, refusal, and withdrawal. When that capacity is denied, it does not disappear. It turns into resentment, passive aggression, quiet bitterness, self-contempt. The man becomes angry at the world for taking what he never defended. Winnicott would call this a collapse of the true self. The man is no longer choosing his actions. He is performing a role to avoid conflict. And performance drains the soul. Ruthlessness in its healthy form is simply the willingness to disappoint, to say no early, to leave cleanly, to enforce boundaries before resentment forms. This is not cruelty. It is self-respect in action. The men who survive the world are not the loudest or the most aggressive. They are the ones who can withdraw without drama, who can deny access without explanation, who can accept being misunderstood without needing to correct it. Machiavelli would summarize this brutally. The man who cannot be ruthless will be consumed by those who can. Becoming ruthless does not mean abandoning morality. It means anchoring it in strength, because morality without strength is just an invitation to be used. The world will keep asking more of you until you show it where the line is. And that line must be enforced not emotionally, not angrily, but decisively. This is the second lesson. The world does not respect good intentions. It respects boundaries backed by consequence. Without them, kindness becomes a weakness. With them, kindness becomes authority. Real dominance begins in the mind. At some point, every man faces a moment that demands action. A line is crossed. Respect is tested. An opportunity appears and waits. Most men hesitate. Not because they don't know what to do, but because they are afraid of the consequences. Machiavelli understood this weakness deeply. Here is the third ruthless truth. The world punishes hesitation more than it punishes mistakes. A mistake can be corrected. Hesitation becomes a reputation. Men who hesitate send a signal without realizing it. They signal uncertainty. They signal fear of conflict. They signal that pressure can move them. And once the world learns this, it applies pressure repeatedly. Most men are taught to think it through. That advice sounds wise until thinking becomes avoidance. Avoidance of confrontation. Avoidance of responsibility. Avoidance of decisive loss. And loss delayed is loss multiplied. Machiavelli watched leaders fall not because they were wrong, but because they waited too long to act. Timing is power. Miss it, and strength becomes irrelevant. Adler would recognize the psychology behind hesitation. Men who doubt their own authority look outward for permission. They wait for consensus. They wait for reassurance. They wait for conditions to feel safe. But power never arrives when conditions are safe. Jung would say the shadow is again at work. The man is afraid of his own assertiveness. Afraid of being seen as harsh. Afraid of being disliked. Afraid of becoming the bad guy. So he delays. And the delay costs him more than decisiveness ever would. The ruthless man does not rush, but he does not freeze. He recognizes the moment and commits fully. If he must say no, he says it once. If he must leave, he leaves cleanly. If he must act, he acts without apology. Winnicott would call this emotional maturity, the capacity to tolerate the discomfort that decisive action creates. Most men choose comfort now and pay chaos later. The ruthless man accepts discomfort now and buys peace later. Here is the harsh reality. The world respects men who move, even when they are wrong, because movement signals authority. Hesitation, on the other hand, teaches the world to wait you out, to push again later, to test you again soon, and each time the cost rises. Machiavelli would state it plainly. The man who delays action is already losing power. Becoming ruthless means ending the habit of delay, not reacting emotionally, not exploding, but acting on time. The world does not reward men who wait for certainty. It rewards men who create it. And certainty is created the moment you decide. There is a lie modern men are taught that sounds noble. Be emotionally open. Be understanding. Lead with empathy. Machiavelli would not reject empathy, but he would warn you what happens when empathy is not governed by strength. Here is the fourth ruthless truth. Uncontrolled empathy makes you exploitable. When a man prioritizes understanding others over protecting himself, he becomes a resource, and resources are consumed. The world does not attack men directly. It appeals to their emotions. It asks for patience. It asks for understanding. It asks for exceptions. And men who are afraid to appear harsh comply. This is where many men are broken. They confuse empathy with surrender. They listen when they should decide. They tolerate when they should withdraw. They explain when they should act. And slowly their authority erodes. Adler would recognize this as misplaced social interest. A man overextends empathy to avoid conflict or rejection. But leadership is not emotional accommodation. Leadership is direction. Jung would say this man is avoiding his shadow. He fears his own hardness. So he disowns it, and what is disowned returns as resentment. The man becomes internally hostile, while remaining externally agreeable. That split is destructive. Winnicott would call this a failure of containment. The man absorbs emotional weight that is not his to carry. He becomes overloaded, and overload leads to collapse. Ruthlessness does not mean cruelty. It means limits. The ability to say, "This is not mine. This stops here. This will not continue," without guilt. The man who survives the world does not eliminate empathy. He controls it. He decides who receives access to it and when. Empathy becomes a choice, not a reflex. Machiavelli understood this clearly. Mercy without strength invites abuse. Strength without mercy invites rebellion. The balance is authority. Authority requires the courage to be misunderstood, to disappoint, to withdraw compassion when it is being used against you. Most men are afraid of this moment, the moment they stop being nice. But nice men are broken quietly. Firm men are respected early. This is the difference between survival and erosion. The world does not break men who are ruthless with boundaries. It breaks men who try to be everything to everyone. If you want to remain intact, you must harden selectively. Not your heart, your limits. This is how ruthlessness protects you, not by turning you cold, but by preventing the world from draining you dry. At some point, every man reaches a fork in the road. He can keep trying to be understood, or he can decide to be unbreakable. Machiavelli knew which path the world forces on you. Here is the final ruthless truth. If you do not protect yourself, no one else will. Not consistently. Not when incentives shift. Not when pressure rises. The world respects men who can stand alone. Most men wait too long to harden. They wait until betrayal, until burnout, until resentment turns inward. By the time they change, damage has already been done. Ruthlessness learned late feels bitter. Ruthlessness learned early feels calm. Jung would say this is the completion of integration. The man accepts his capacity for hardness without becoming cruel. He no longer disowns strength. To preserve approval, he becomes whole. Adler would recognize true confidence here, not dominance, not superiority, self-trust. The man no longer needs permission to enforce boundaries. Winnicott would call this emotional adulthood, the capacity to disappoint others without abandoning yourself, the capacity to endure disapproval without collapsing. This is what ruthlessness really is. Not aggression, not intimidation, selective withdrawal, early refusal, clear consequences. When a man becomes ruthless with his standards, the world adjusts. People test less, demand less, take less. Not because he is feared, because he is clear. The world breaks men who leak boundaries. It exhausts men who hesitate. It consumes men who confuse kindness with sacrifice. Machiavelli's lesson is not dark. It is realistic. The man who refuses to be ruthless internally will be brutalized externally. Ruthlessness is not about becoming dangerous to others. It is about becoming impossible to exploit. Once you accept this, something settles. You stop over-explaining. You stop over-giving. You stop over-enduring. You act early. You leave cleanly. You protect your time, energy, and direction. This is how men stay intact. Not by being harder than the world, but by being clearer than it. Real dominance begins in the mind.